Hi everyone! Happy February! Feel ko na namang makisawsaw sa recent ganaps on COVID-19. So meron na naman akong pa-mini lecture. I want to keep this short kasi walang masyadong oras ang bisibisihang bata. Pero honestly, hindi ko alam kung kakayanin ko na ikrean itong mga lectures na to kasi machika talaga ako. Anywho, let's do a scientific chismis on SARS-CoV2 emerging variants na siyang laman ng maraming news articles the past few days. So, let's begin. Konting background lang about the SARS-CoV2 variant structure. So, eto ang mukha ng SARS-CoV2 when viewed using an electron microscope. So, magnified to ng bonggang-bongga para makita si Ateng and her corona. Yung crown-like spikes na to on their virion surface, hence the name coronavirus. Ito naman yung cartoon version niya para lang mas makita nyo yung different structural protein components ni SARS-CoV2. Yung medyo color orange na to, yan yung tinatawag na spike glycoprotein or S protein. Ito yung part ng virus na gamit sa pagpasok ng cells ng tao. Bale yung surface ng host cells kasi merong tinatawag na ACE2 receptors and yung spike protein ni SARS-CoV2 kayang kumapit sa ACE2 receptor and once na makapag-bind, merong series of events na nangyayari na ang ending ay makakapasok yung virus sa loob ng cell and doon pwede na siyang magparami by replicating its genome and forming a new progeny variants basically. So basically, importante ang virus spike protein or S protein sa host cell entry. Since yung S protein din na to ang pinaka-exposed na part ng virus, ito rin ang pinaka-ideal target ng host immune response, especially ng antibodies na made-develop against the infection. Actually, this is the reason why spike protein ang karamihang antigenic target ng mga existing COVID bakuna natin ngayon. From Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna to AstraZeneca and Gamaleya to Novavax. Iba-ibang vaccine designs to, but still the same vaccine target, yung S protein as the antigen. Yung medyo iba lang is yung sa Sinovac and sa Sinopharm because buong inactivated virus or pinatay na virus ang ginawa nilang vaccine antigen. So, eto yon. So, yung ibang bakuna, eto lang yung target nila. Yung orange lang na to. Yung mga inactivated vaccines, eto basically buong pinatay na version ng virus yung isasaksak sa'yo. It's dead though. So, yun. But anyway, for details, just refer to my previous scientific chismis on COVID vaccines na lang kasi mas detalyado doon. So, ngayon na medyo familiar na kayo sa viral spike glycoprotein or S protein, let's talk about mutations and a little bit on virus evolution. I don't have time to explain this in detail, but essentially, mutations sa virus can be as simple as base substitution, yung napalitan ng isang nucleotide with another nucleotide, ang genetic code or genome ng virus during replication. Pwede rin na nadagdagan or nabawasan ng at least one nucleotide yung viral RNA genome. Then there's also recombination, which is a bit more complicated as a concept. Medyo komplikado siya. But for this chismis, dadmahin na lang natin muna para hindi naman ganun kagulo. Yun. So in general, normal lang sa viruses ang mutation, especially for RNA viruses. Dahil yung RNA polymerase na siyang viral enzyme na responsible sa pagkopya ng genetic code nila ay normally error prone siya. What this means is every time na ipapakopya ng isang RNA virus ang sarili niya, magkakamali ang tagakopya niya. And therefore, ang end product is mostly, if not always, a slightly different version ng genome sequence ni RNA virus. A typical viral RNA polymerase has an error rate of about 1 in every 1,000 to 100,000 base pairs. So, kung yung SARS-CoV-2 is about 29.9 kb, that is, or let's just say 30 kb, that is about 3 to 30 base pair error every replication. So chances are, every kopya ng SARS-CoV-2 sa sarili niya, merong at least 3 to 30 na nucleotide substitution na nangyayari sa kanya. But actually, wait. One unique feature ng mga coronaviruses is their RNA proofreading mechanisms. So, actually, unlike other RNA viruses na maraming typos sa genetic code every time na nangungopya sila, etong si SARS-CoV-2, meron siyang parang proofreader and editor. So, less ang mali ng pagkopya sa kanya. And therefore, relatively less ang mutation rate niya. Based on available genome sequences, it was estimated na around 2 mutation per month ang rate ni SARS-CoV-2. That is relatively lower than other RNA viruses, about 50% less than the influenza virus, and a quarter less than HIV. So good news yan for many people na praning sa mutations. Siguro kasi na-associate natin ang mutation sa X-Men level ng changes in phenotype. Ang point lang, wag masyado magpanic pag sinabing nagkaroon ng mutation ang virus mo. Kasi normal lang yun for viruses to have mutation for replication. Yun lang. So, para lang mas ma-appreciate ninyo kung gaano na karaming mutations ang nangyari kay SARS-CoV-2 genome sequence since na-report ito in late December 2019 or early January 2020, here's a phylogenetic tree figure I got from Next Strain earlier today, showing the evolutionary relationships of SARS-CoV-2 isolates based on hundreds of thousands of genomes that they have sequenced or sequences that have been submitted to them. So, kada dot na to represents a SARS-CoV-2 genome sequence with different mutations. Then, based on genome sequence similarity, SARS-CoV-2 samples collected globally were divided into different clades. A clade is a genetic grouping for organisms that originated from a common ancestor. So for SARS-CoV-2, ito yung 19A na nakuha sa Wuhan. And as you can see, ito yung first, yung mga Wuhan cases. And then over time, nagkaroon ng maraming mutations. So nagkaroon ng maraming variants. And these variants were grouped into clades and umabot na siya from 19A to 20J. So marami na. So in fairness, medyo malayo na rin ang narating ni Ateng. So yun na nga. From 19A, meron na ngayong 12, I think 12, 1, 2, 3, 12 different clades of SARS-CoV-2. So, I mean, I guess you can say that that's a lot of mutations and quote unquote evolution already. Pero, I mean, let's talk about that later. And this is another data that I got from NextStrain showing the geographical distribution of the SARS-CoV-2 variants per clade. And here's the Philippines na merong two different colors, meaning meron lang two different clades na na-identify sa Pilipinas so far with about, I think, ang liit pero mga 60 to 40 yung proportion, I think. So just a closer look sa Pinas SARS-CoV-2 samples, which you can see as the orange dots right here. So far, RITM submitted genome sequences from 10 samples collected from late March to early November 2020. And so far, nasa dalawang clades sila, 19A, yung original clade, similar to the Wuhan, initial Wuhan isolates, and 20B. Yun yung grouping nila. But hindi pa rito included ang mga recently sequenced genome ng Philippine Genome Center from confirmed UK variant cases. So those are actually interesting sequences that I really would like to see. As well as the other SARS-CoV-2 genome sequences from Luna Military Hospital na mga 23 genome sequences din ata. Pero mga earlier variants din yun, not the one from PGC recently na from confirmed UK variant cases. Anyway, I hope claro that mutations are normal for RNA viruses like SARS-CoV-2, and they generally arise randomly. Hindi automatic na ang mutation ay bad news for us. Actually, pwede siyang good, bad, or dead malang, or no effect. From the perspective of us humans na siyang host ni ateng COVID, yung bad consequences, of course, is kung yung specific or a group of mutations na nangyari ay nag-result sa specific phenotype or yung mga observable characteristics resulting from your genetic sequence. Kung yung mga mutations na yon provided the emerging variant some advantages that made it more harmful for us hosts. Like kung mas naging madali ba ang transmission nito, or naging mas infectious siya, or naging mas nakamamatay na siyang kinatatakutan natin sa mga emerging variants ngayon, or di kaya kung pati yung initially not so vulnerable groups like yung healthy adults and the children ay naging mas susceptible na rin sa bagong variants, and like magkakaroon na sila ng mas moderate to severe disease, not just asymptomatic to mild lang gaya ng trend sa earlier variants. Also, kung ang emerging variant ay significantly different in terms of conformation and structure sa earlier variants, then merong chance na ang protective response na na-generate from an earlier variant may not neutralize the new variant completely, or maybe not at all. And assuming that neutralizing antibody response is one of the major protective responses to SARS-CoV-2, then this could lead to possible reinfection of of individuals previously infected by the early variant, or kung yung vaccine was designed based on spike proteins of early variants, which is the case for all the available COVID vaccines that we have right now, then it is possible na suboptimal lang ang protection na pwedeng ma-provide ng bakuna kahit pa highly protective ito against the earlier variants. Pwede rin na yung mutations ay nasa portion or portions ng genome na gamit for qPCR testing. And therefore, hindi na nare-recognize nung existing primers and probes yung dapat ay target niya dun sa viral genome. And this could lead to false negative results. And I don't know if we will have time to talk about this later, but wag muna nating i-discuss right now. As I have said, many of these mutations arise due to random errors during replication of the viral RNA genome. But sometimes, merong mga variants na mag-emerge with these worrying mutations because the changes in their genetic code led to phenotypes or yung mga observable characteristics nga that means bad news sa perspective ng host and ng ating public health system. Because the viral spike glycoprotein is very important for the virus, many of these mutations leading to worrisome phenotypes are in the spike protein. For example, isa sa mga mutations na pinag-aaralan ngayon ng mga experts ay ang mutation sa amino acid position number 501 ng spike protein. In the wild-type version ng SARS-CoV2, that is yung original virus na nakuha sa Wuhan sometime in December 2019, the amino acid in that position is an asparagine, yung N dito. And genome sequencing experts noticed that variants with mutations in this position appear to be rapidly taking over as the dominant variant in several countries and in several areas. Of note, the UK, the South Africa, and the Brazil variants na nasa news ngayon, they all have mutation in this position. From an asparagine, yung N, to a tyrosine, yung Y, the red, basically yan, from N501Y. I don't think you really need to know the details ng mutation na to, but for this purpose, what you probably need to be aware of is that position 501 is in the receptor binding domain, or RBD, of the viral spike glycoprotein. And as this RBD, as the name implies, is important for the binding of the virus to its ACE2 receptor sa human cell. And it appears that a change from asparagine to tyrosine allowed the new variants to enter the host cells more efficiently than the original strain. In fact, this mutation has been reported to increase transmission in all the new variants that have been reported. Mutation in this position has also been associated with adaptation to rodents, mice, ferrets, mink, and a few other animals, essentially allowing the variants to host jump, which is bad for us because then these animals can act as carriers of the virus for more chances of transmission. So this graph right here shows you the countries where variants with a specific mutation has been observed so far. Yung pinaka-popular nga are the South Africa, the UK, and the Brazil ones. But these mutations have also been reported in variants from several other countries. And one important thing to note here is that in many cases, mutation of asparagine in position 501 to either tyrosine, threonine, or serine arose independently. In other words, nagkanya-kanyang mutate si SARS-CoV-2 from different countries in this position 501. Meaning, hindi kailangang mag-import pa ng variant with this mutation ang mga countries na to kasi mukhang merong selective pressure to mutate in this position. Because doing so seemed to provide a resulting variant with an advantage of higher efficiency for cell entry. Ang implication, even if we close our border para hindi makapasok ang UK variant sa Pilipinas, chances are, at some point, especially kung wala namang shortage sa mai-infect na host, a variant with mutation in this position will likely arise and evolve eventually. Now, this is not to say na kailangan magpabaya na tayo sa umiikot na UK variant sa Pinas, because that specific variant has several other mutations in its RNA genome na hindi natin kailangang isa-isahin dito, and ang resulting phenotype is a SARS-CoV-2 variant with higher transmission. So mas mabilis kumalat. And recently, there are reports that the UK variant has higher mortality rates sa elderly population. So, yes, kailangan natin maging alert kay UK variant. But never think na hindi pwedeng mag-mutate ang existing SARS-CoV-2 variants sa mga areas natin into something like this with higher ability for transmission. Kahit pa isolate natin ang mga lugar natin from the rest of the world, kung patuloy yung pagpapasapasahan ng mga virus sa mga inhabitants sa areas, meaning more transmission, more within-host replication ang mangyayari, and therefore, more chances for that worrisome mutation to occur randomly. Meaning, the more na merong hawaan, the more chances of winning a worrisome mutation tayo. So, that's the reality. Another worrisome mutation na na-identify ng mga experts recently ay ang mutation ng glutamic acid sa position 484 ng spike glycoprotein. Again, just like the N501, this mutation is in the receptor binding domain. And this was observed in the South Africa and Brazil variants. A change from glutamic acid to lysine, which thankfully is not in the UK variant. Based on initial studies, mutation in this position resulted to a significant change in the spike protein's antigenic profile and therefore likely reduce the ability of neutralizing antibodies produced against early variants of SARS-CoV-2. It reduces their ability to neutralize new variants with this mutation. So what does this mean? Since hindi na super swak yung antibodies na na-produce from the earlier variants against this new variant, malamang hindi na rin completely mapipigilan ang infection ng new variant via neutralizing antibodies. One of the possible implication is that kahit na-infect ka na dati ng earlier variant, pwede ka pa ring ma-reinfect with this new variant na merong mutation sa E484K. Of course, this is assuming na yung protective immunity against SARS-CoV-2 ay mainly from antibody neutralization. There are, of course, other components of the host immune response that can produce this protective immunity, merong cytotoxic T cells and other memory B and T cell responses na pwedeng maging involved. Pero magugulo lang yung usapan. So for this purpose, focus lang tayo sa antibody neutralization. Another possible implication is in the efficacy of convalescent plasma as a treatment strategy for these new variants. Pwede kasi na hindi na maging epektibo yung treatment kasi nga quote-unquote resistant na yung new variant sa neutralizing antibodies produced from the earlier variants. This also has some implication in the efficacy of the currently available vaccines. If you can remember, many of the available COVID vaccines use the spike glycoprotein as their vaccine target or their antigen. Now, the spike protein sequence that they used in the vaccine design were based on the earlier variants. Kasi nga, these vaccines were designed and developed sometime in the mid-2020, nung time na wala pa itong mga new variants na to, hindi pa sila nag-emerge. So, most likely, or at least there is a possibility na less optimal ang current vaccines in protecting against new variants with the E484K mutation. And while this is unfortunate, hindi naman katapusan ng usefulness ng bakuna ng COVID vaccine actually. Ibig sabihin lang nito, either mas pabobonggahin natin ang response by adding a booster shot or maybe kailangan i-tweak natin ng konti ang sequence ng mga spike protein or a spike protein gene sa bakuna para mas maging effective sa mga na-identify na new variants. And hopefully I can talk more about this later. So this is a table comparing the three new COVID variants na sikat sa news ngayon. You have the UK, the South Africa, and the Brazil variants. And they were named, actually may iba silang name, but for simplicity, let's just use the country of origin as their name, or where they were first detected. I have indicated the key mutations here, including the 501Y mutation that are present in all three variants, and the E484K mutation na meron lang sa South Africa and Brazil, and wala sa UK variant. UK variant also has this deletion sa 69 or 70 amino acid position ng spike glycoprotein, which was not observed sa South Africa and sa Brazil na variant. And this deletion, the 6970 deletion, has been reported to result in conformational changes sa spike protein na wala sa dalawa. So this table also shows na while majority of the mutations are in the spike protein, there are also mutations in the other viral proteins, such as the nucleocapsid, the non-structural proteins ORF1A and ORF8, whose scope of functions remain relatively unknown, but they are said to be likely involved sa cell signaling, modification, and also sa virulence. Interestingly, all of these three new variants have this deletion sa position 3675 to 3677 ng ORF1A. But I don't know exactly kung ano yung resulting phenotype nung deletion na to, or ano yung implication ng deletion na yon. Now, it is not clear whether all these new variants suddenly arose just by chance. In short, dahil nga dun lang sa random mutation na nangyayari naman since error-prone nga yung replication mechanism ng most RNA virus, although hindi kasing error-prone yung coronaviruses. So hindi alam kung nag-arise lang all these yung new variants independently, or kung merong selective pressure na nangyayari. Kasi one of the possible hypotheses for the origin of the UK variant involved, I think, chronically ill patients treated with the convalescent plasma, yung antibodies from survivors na nilalagay nila as part of the therapy ng infected individuals as well, experimental therapies. And dahil chronic nga yung infection, mas mahaba ang chance ng virus na mag-replicate, thereby increasing the odds for mutations. And with the constant administration of the convalescent plasma raised against an earlier variant, it may have put more pressure on the virus to evolve, since tinatry nga na i-neutralize ng convalescent plasma yung virus sa katawan ng mga chronically infected patients. Yung mga version ng virus na susceptible sa antibodies na yon mawawala kasi may inhibit sila, and yung matitira na lang are those versions na hindi completely na-neutralize ng antibodies, which is essentially survival of the fittest sa mundo ng mga virus. But that's one possibility kung paano nagkaroon ng UK variant, na parang combination siya ng random mutation and a selection pressure from the convalescent antibody treatment. So, the UK variant was first detected in September 2020. So, medyo matagal na siyang naghahasik ng lagim sa mundo. In fact, umabot na siya sa Pilipinas. I actually don't know kung ilan ang latest count ng UK variant positive sa Pilipinas. According to the news, yung last na check ko around January 23 or 24, meron at least 17 confirmed cases from the Bontoc cluster and yung sa Dubai flight cluster. But I really don't know yung exact na number. The South African variant is relatively new, having first detected in December 2020. And even more recent is the Brazil variant na parang, yung Brazil variant P1 na parang last week lang ata unang nabalita. So all these SARS-CoV variants have been reported to have higher transmission than the wild type by about 50%. So yung UK variant and the South Africa variant, they say that it's 50% more transmissible than the wild type. The wild type is the original virus variant na nanggaling sa Wuhan, or kung ano man yung variant na dominant, I guess, sa area na yon. Then you have the Brazil variant na transmissible din daw, although hindi ko alam by how much, but they said it's more transmissible than the dominant strain, and nagiging mas, unti-unti siyang nagiging mas common and nagiging mas dominant sa population dun sa isang Amazon city sa Brazil. As for the virulence, so far, based on preliminary data, the UK variant have 30% higher mortality rate in people 60 years old and above. Although mukhang wala naman daw effect sa disease severity. And I should point out na nasa preliminary stage pa lang din ang investigation sa South Africa and Brazil variants, pero sabi mukhang wala namang apparent increase in virulence observed sa South Africa and Brazil variants. Yung eto lang sa UK strain, merong parang potential na magiging mas deadly siya sa mga elderly. Now, in terms of antibody neutralization naman, which measures how effective antibodies are in inhibiting the new variant, so far wala naman daw evidence that the UK variant can escape neutralization of available antibodies tested. But for the South Africa variant, reduced neutralization has been observed, and this is quite unfortunate because sabi ko nga kanina, if the neutralizing antibodies are the main protective response of the body against SARS-CoV-2, then the immunity that COVID survivors developed from a previous infection with an early strain or by individuals immunized with vaccines targeting the spike protein of an early strain, it may not be protective as it is against an earlier variant. In other words, mababa ang cross-protection between the early variants versus the South Africa variant. At least yun yung preliminary observation nila. And one indirect evidence of this is the vaccine efficacy data recently released by Novavax, wherein they showed that their recombinant protein vaccine is 89.3 protective in the UK trials, wherein 50% of the positive cases has the UK variant, while in the South Africa trials naman, wherein 90% of the positive cases has the South African variant, it is only 49.4 effective. Clearly, merong less yung protective effect ng vaccine sa South Africa variant. Cross-protection from prior infection against the Brazil variant is currently being investigated, but they have already shown that significant number of reinfection cases has been reported in individuals previously infected with the early strain circulating in Brazil, suggesting na hindi complete yung protection nila ng mga survivors na yon against the new Brazil variant. In fact, there is one city in the Amazon where dati pa there were more than 70% of the population has already been infected with an early variant. So, of course, one would expect na malamang naabot na nila yung herd immunity, diba? Kasi more than 70% na eh. But no, meron na sila ulit na ongoing outbreak ngayon with the new Brazil variant, meaning hindi complete yung protection. So that's quite sad. Walang complete protective immunity from a prior natural infection ng early variant. I hope that's clear. Anywho, given the information we have so far on this various emerging variants, now what are our next steps? As the general public, what can we do? Magpapanik na ba tayo dahil mukhang wala ng chance na manalo tayo against ating COVID, and mukhang forever na tayong nasa state of pandemya? Yes, the emergence of various newer variants with apparently higher transmission is quite alarming. Even more alarming is the likelihood that a previous infection and our current available vaccines can only provide partial protection against some of these variants, especially with the against the South African variant. But as the general public, what else can we do? Well, basically ganun pa rin. Huwag magpasaway at sumunod lang sa mga alam na nating COVID rules and restrictions, yung mga COVID protocols like practice social distancing, magsuot ng mask and face shields, wala munang unnecessary travel and social contact, and if necessary, follow the quarantine protocols, especially if you have vulnerable individuals in your household. Other than that, what else you can do? Hindi natin mapipigilan yung virus evolution. So, pointless na magpaka-stress sa mga bagay na wala tayong masyadong control. Kailangan na natin maging masunurin sa mga, yun na nga, sa mga COVID safety rules and restrictions. And that's a great help already para sa ating mga health authorities. Speaking of health authorities, the emergence of new variants means extra work and vigilance for them. We will need routine genomic surveillance of the circulating SARS-CoV variants in respective areas para updated tayo sa trend ng evolution ni ating COVID sa Pilipinas. And dito papasok yung expertise ng Philippine Genome Center and RITM in cooperation with IATF and DOH, of course. Gaya nung pinakita ko sa earlier slide, our ITM has done genomic sequencing for at least 10 samples representing early variants from, if I remember correctly, from March to November 2020 na mga COVID cases. And PGC has also been doing the genome sequencing of potential UK variant cases, although hindi ako updated sa current count ng confirmed cases ng UK variant ngayon. We need routine genomic surveillance para mag-guarantee ang pagbigay ng appropriate and perhaps optimal na public health responses based on the circulating strain sa areas. Like kung kailangan bang i-modify yung primers and probes ng qPCR test for better detection. Actually, hindi ko alam kung ano yung gamit na primers and probes sa Pilipinas ngayon. Like kung anong combo ng genes or kung anong combo ng spike protein gene fragments ang target for PCR amplification na gamit nila ngayon. But I hope yung combo nila is appropriate for detection of any emerging variants. And I'm sure may mga experts na nagmo-monitor dyan. But really, kailangan nating malaman yung trend of evolution para alam natin kung tama, appropriate pa ba yung qPCR testing protocol natin. Otherwise, magkakaroon tayo ng maraming false negative. So akala natin wala negative siya or wala siyang SARS-CoV2 infection. Yun pala, meron lang siyang bagong variant na hindi kayang i-detect nung existing PCR test. But again, dahil combo naman to na usually maraming genes or maraming portion ng spike protein gene, then I'm sure my way to make sure na less yung false negative results. Routine genomic surveillance would also help the authorities decide kung kailangan niya bang magdagdag ng booster shot ng bakuna in case partial protection lang ang kaya niyang i-provide against the new variant, kung enough na ba yung normal 2 doses, or yun na nga kung kailangan pa bang mag-booster, or kung sakaling maging resistant sa sa anti-viral drugs or antibody therapy yung pasyente dahil sa new variant, kung kailangan bang gumamit ng doctors ng different treatment approach when this happens. Basta mga ganyan. Okay. So this is the virus evolution timeline for influenza A and B, yung virus na nagkukos ng flu. And as you can see, flu virus has been in circulation since the 1890s with six presumptive pandemics within this time period. So from 1891 to 2013, nagkaroon ng 6 pandemic ng flu virus. Now, we don't really have to go into the details of this basically for illustration purposes lang to, just so you will have an appreciation ng timeline ng virus evolution. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, influenza virus actually has a higher mutation rate than SARS-CoV-2. I think 50% less ang mutation ng SARS-CoV-2. Not to mention na since segmented virus sa influenza, meron actually added possibility for reassortment pa yung flu virus, adding to the complexity of its evolution. But hindi natin kailangang isipin yan. Ang gusto ko lang ma-realize ninyo is that sa perspective ng pathogen evolution on a population level, relatively nasa early stage pa rin tayo ng SARS-CoV-2 evolution. Yung equivalent actually ng December 2019 na start ng SARS-CoV-2 infection sa Wuhan is this point right here, yung 1891, when 100% of the global population is still naive, meaning wala pang ni isa na merong protective immunity against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Kasi first time pa lang siyang nakita ng immune system ng tao. Although technically, I think people with prior common cold coronavirus exposure has been shown to have some low level of protection, but again, this will just confuse things, so simplified version lang muna ang tingnan natin. Given na nag-uumpisa pa lang sa paghahasik si Ateng and patuloy pa siyang nag-i-evolve as evidenced by the emergence of these worrisome variants, and at the same time, ang mga scientific experts naman natin ay patuloy na lumalaban by formulating various treatment and preventive strategies, it is really still difficult to predict ang direction ng SARS-CoV-2 evolution, especially in the short term. But I guess one can hope na sana sundin ni Ateng ang trade-off hypothesis. Now, trade-off hypothesis is a concept in virus evolution, and I don't think we really have to be technical sa chismisan na to. But in a nutshell, it argues that pathogens tend to evolve toward ever-decreasing virulence. Why? Because the death of the host or even serious disability is ultimately harmful to the pathogen living inside the host. Conventional wisdom in virus evolution says that generally viruses evolve towards a virulence or less nakamamatay or less harmful na version. Meaning, over time, mas malaki ang chance na yung hindi mas nakamamatay na version ng virus ang mas maghahari. And they've done a lot of studies on this in HIV. Ito rin actually yung same reason why yung mga super deadly viruses like Ebola, kung saan about 90% ang mortality rate, kasi nga, pag namatay yung host, mamamatay din eventually yung virus because viruses need living cells to keep them going. Kasi nga hijacker yung mga yan and ultimate parasite. So, less na rin yung chances na ma-spread pa further ang infection pag masyadong nakamamatay ang virus. So, in short, malamang eventually magkakaroon ng trade-off ang virulence and virus fitness or ang pagiging ultimate survivor ng specific virus variant na yon. And this could mean good news for us in the long run. But remember, as of today, February 1, 2021, about 104 million people in the world pa lang ang infected ng SARS-CoV-2. Side note pala muna. I included this table para lang may idea kayo on how bad our COVID situation is compared to other countries. I feel like we should not focus on just the case count kasi everything is relative naman sa kung gaano kadami yung population ng country, diba? So, para standardized ng comparison, I took cases of infection and deaths per 1 million population. And as you can see, Philippines is actually doing okay. I mean, of course, marami pa rin yung cases, more than 500,000, which is sad, but relative to other countries, carry lang tayo actually. I was actually surprised na better ang stats ng Pilipinas than Norway, which is thought to have one of the best COVID situations sa mundo. But yun, I mean, in terms of infection cases per million population, mas okay yung Pilipinas kaysa Norway. And of course, mas okay siya kaysa US. Sa death naman, medyo comparable yung Pilipinas and Norway. Pero definitely lower than yung cases sa yung total deaths sa US. But of course, one can argue na kulang din sa testing sa Pilipinas. So, most likely underestimated yung figure natin for total infection cases. But still, we are doing better than other countries. And I think that's something we should be grateful for. Wala, pampa good vibes lang. Or something lang na medyo positive. Anyway, I know that 104 million COVID cases in the world sound a lot, but considering na 7.8 billion ang population ng tao sa mundo this 2021, that is only 1.3% of the global population na infected with SARS-CoV-2 so far. Meaning, meron pa tayong 98.7% individuals sa mundo na naive pa rin sa SARS-CoV-2 infection. Naive, meaning wala pa silang immunity against the virus. Sa ganyan kadaming naive individual na pwede pang mahawaan ni ateng COVID, and the fact na merong possibility for reinfection even those who were previously infected by an earlier variant, wala pang masyadong selection pressure for one highly virulent variant to adapt and evolve into something less deadly. Kasi nga, with 98.7% naive individuals, medyo meron pa siyang unlimited host na pwede niyang mabiktima. I've actually done some virus evolution and virus competition and fitness studies before, which I call Worrisome. And isa yan sa conclusion namin na kung hindi limited yung supply ng host, walang masyadong pressure for one virus variant to exercise prudence. That is, wala pang pressure na maselect ang less virulent version. So, with only host na pwedeng ma-infect ni Ateng, merong chance na hindi pa gumana yung trade-off hypothesis at this point of her evolution. Kasi nga, nasa early stage pa lang, and pwede pa niyang masustain yung circulation ng mga highly virulent variants, albeit temporarily siguro, kasi nga, meron pa siyang only host. Anywho, yan lang ang litanya ko about virus evolution, only because isa to sa personal favorite topic ko sa virology, along with mechanisms of pathogenesis as determined by virus-host interactions. But I digress. So, for us to minimize the spread, we need to achieve herd immunity. And for SARS-CoV2, it was estimated na dapat 60 to 70% of the population should be immune either following natural infection or via vaccination. So that means kailangan 4.7 to 5.5 billion individuals ang kailangang maging immune via natural infection or via vaccination para achieve natin yung herd immunity. And so, yan lang ang segue ko para i-emphasize ang importance of vaccination at this time when several worrisome variants are emerging. Think of it this way. Every time na merong na-infect na tao ng SARS-CoV-2, that can actually be considered as a chance for the SARS-CoV-2 to reinvent itself by providing the virus a chance to mutate every time na nare-replicate ang kanyang RNA genome na punong-puno ng mutation. Pag sinuwerte si Ateng, makaka-generate siya ng variant na merong advantage over other variants such as higher transmission, immunization strategy, maybe some resistance to antiviral drugs na hindi natin na-cover dito. And pag siya ang naging fittest version ng virus, that variant can eventually dominate the circulation. And if nasa early stage pa tayo ng virus evolution and wala pang masyadong selective pressure since meron pa siyang unlimited host na pwedeng biktimahin, baka hindi pa pwedeng masunod ang sinasabi sa trade-off hypothesis na evolution towards avirulence or less virulence. And therefore, pwede pang masustain ang existence ng virulent version of SARS-CoV-2 kahit pa nga temporary lang ito. So, ang next goal natin is to prevent further evolution ni Ateng by minimizing its chance to replicate and mutate. And yan yung sabi ni Lolo Fauci. Our best possible option at this point is to stop the spread of SARS-CoV-2 by vaccinating people as quickly as possible. Unless, of course, gusto nyo magtago sa kanya-kanyang kuweba for years. And even that won't even guarantee anything because your immune system will remain naive to the SARS-CoV-2. And so by the time na lumabas ka sa bahay mo, after pagtatago ng years, and if the virus is still in circulation, you will remain susceptible to it. So basically, you are stuck in this kind of perpetuity kung ang iyong fighting strategy ay ang magtago lang. na hindi practical, not to mention hindi rin sustainable. Kumusta naman na lang yung mangyayari sa ekonomiya kung forever na lang tayo magtatago? Yon. Now, people are getting worried with the news na yun na nga, yung current COVID vaccines can only provide partial protection against some of the new variants, particularly the South African variant. And while this is bad news, hindi naman ibig sabihin nun is wala nang kwenta ang mga existing bakuna. Unang-una, partial protection is still better than zero protection. And the efficacy data that we got was only based on 2 dosing regimen. So basically 2 doses na pagbabakuna lang yon. Kasi it is actually still possible to do extra booster shots just to further optimize your memory responses. I've talked about this sa other Chismis. And also the vaccine companies can even tweak the next booster shot or the next shot to make it more appropriate to the dominating variant in the area. As long as alam natin kung ano yung kumakalat na variant at ano yung dominant na variant, we can make some changes sa vaccine right now para mas maging swak siya sa circulating variant. And this is quite similar to how the flu vaccines are administered annually right now. For the flu shots, may mga experts na nagpe-predict ng magiging dominant flu strains for the next year, and the appropriate vaccines are produced based on that prediction. And since nga more or less yung emergency use vaccines na meron tayo ngayon already have some data on its short-term safety and efficacy, and more or less okay naman, this is already a good start. I know it's not the perfect solution, but at least now we have a better fighting chance against attend COVID. And I really think we really have to focus more on the positive developments sa ating COVID saga. Kasi wala naman tayong choice dahil hindi naman pwedeng susurrender tayo, di ba? Kumbaga, bawal yung defeatist mindset dito. So, isipin nyo na lang parang this is also part of our evolution as thinking human beings. And tapos na. And I thank you. Ingat sa lahat. Bye!